Welcome to another episode of Beta Talk, and this is one of my heat pump ready episodes. It's important to point out to you that the views expressed in this episode do not represent the government or any of their departments. So, welcome to the show. I've got Zach Gill from Energiesprong, and I've got Matthew Boyes from Hometree. And today we're talking about the innovative finance models for heat pump deployment. And both these entities are involved in the Heat Pump Ready program. So, welcome, Zach. You and I have exchanged emails in the past, haven't we, to discuss your Energiesprong. So, just tell my listeners who Energiesprong are, and then we'll sort of dive into what you've been doing in the Heat Pump Ready program.
Yeah, no, Nathan, thanks for having me on today. Energiesprong, what are we? That is a good question. So Energiesprong are we often get misconstrued as what we do, but we are market enablers. We're there to help kind of catalyze the retrofit industry and bring together the right pieces of the puzzles. So we don't actually do any retrofit ourselves, but we align the clients, the funders, the innovators, the solution providers, the contractors who are on site actually kind of installing the measures. And we try and look for the best way for that to happen that we can achieve at scale in the UK. And underpinning our kind of logic and our model is that homes should be performance guaranteed. So a retrofit should happen and it should be guaranteed and measured in reality. That there should be it should be outcome based. So great, your design model says it was going to achieve this, that, and the other. What actually happens? And that it should be something that can be scaled up in the future. So lots of the pilot projects might have come in at higher costs than you might expect, but the intention is to get those innovations into the industry so that things can be scaled up. So we quite like things like off-site manufacture of insulation, but actually lots of our projects haven't used off-site manufacture. We like heat pumps, but equally lots of our projects have used, we've just had some recently use infrared panels. So, looking at kind of the option of them to achieve the kind of specs that we want. So we're relatively agnostic in terms of solutions. We want things that work in reality, that are affordable, that can be kind of, brought out at scale.
This is because I mean, for those listeners that don't know who Energy Strong are, you're well known for manufacturing or having made these. It's kind of like these external kits that just go literally wrap around a house, don't they? They just insulate the complete house, don't they?
Yeah, so we think, or originally, certainly when we started out, we felt that, traditional on-site insulation of fabric is slow and expensive, and you can't bring the costs down, and quality control has to be done on site. And I'm looking out the window now, it's very cold out there, it's a bit drizzly, not many people are going to be rendering today or doing bricklaying. So manufacturing things in a factory where it's quality controlled. And that's not just insulation, that's energy systems as well. So we've had lots of projects where heat pumps have been coupled with batteries and thermal stores and kind of put into a pod that can be mounted externally to the property. Um, and those approaches are quite new, modern methods of construction and, innovative solutions. And there's lots of hurdles to overcome with doing that. But you can kind of see the logic of, like, if you crack that nut, then actually you could repeat that same thing that you've produced and, apply it to lots of different properties.
Mm.
So lots of archetyping to kind of figure out which properties can have certain measures. That's actually one of our other heat pump ready projects. We've got two, but we'll talk about the finance one today mainly. Um, trying to look where those measures can be applied and then kind of scale that, and then that brings the cost, economies of scale come into play, and you bring down the cost of manufacture.
And you also touched on a point earlier that you're champions of this whole thing around measured performance, aren't you? Which and I am as
Definitely.
well. Rather than just assuming something's worked, you guys sort of champion. Well, let's measure. So you're very much into HTC, I imagine, and Watts per
Yes.
Kelvin.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Actual kilowatt hours that are being consumed from the grid is kind of where it's at in terms of what residents feel. Actual internal temperatures and relative humidities and mold risks and all of that kind of stuff. We want to know that these things are working. We want to know from heat pumps, like, are they delivering what they're supposed to be delivering? And there's always research that goes on. Lots of the longitudinal studies kind of say heat pumps are maybe around 2.5 to 3 kind of COPs. So putting in a kilowatt hour of electricity, getting out between 2.5 and 3 of heat. But actually, we see loads of installations that are more like 4, so you're getting 4 times the amount of heat out. And they're really achievable. So that's what we should be doing. We should be replicating those ones and using the data to go, how did that one achieve such a good COP, and how can I get that on every project?
Hmm.
And looking at the ones that aren't working so well to say, why did that one not work so well? What can we tweak and change? What's the installation or the kind of control logic to make that work? So yeah, I think data needs to underpin the retrofit journey to keep that confidence. I think it's missing from current schemes. Past 2035 has a little bit of it in there, but it's hard to kind of really embed it. But actually, we know from clients, residents, solution providers, main contractors, those kind of people, like they want to know, like, should I be using this bit of kit or that bit of kit, and how should I install it better? They really want to know that. So I think it's quite an easy hurdle to overcome, really. And yeah, we do that in various measures. But actually, we found through this project on the Heat Pump Ready, manufacturers of heat pumps are moving towards much more data open
Yes.
systems. So we can get a lot of information from a heat pump now that you couldn't get from an old boiler, even though it existed. And you can pop that onto the cloud, access the data, and log in and see if something's been changed, and look at flow temps and COPs, and it's really useful. So I think there's a big shift towards better
Hmm.
performance and easier performance measurement in the future.
Yeah, you're right. I'm going to introduce Matthew because we'll come back to you, Zach, and ask you specifically what you're doing within the Heat Pump Ready program. And it's obviously going to be about finance. Finance, I know zilch about, by the way. So it's going to be very interesting for me to sort of hear what's been going on. Matthew, you're from an entity called Hometree. Just tell us what Hometree is. Now, I know a little bit about Hometree because you've just acquired one of my friend's companies, IMS, up in Scotland.
Right, yes, of course. So I'm Matt Boyes, the managing director of Hometree Finance. So one of the kind of three divisions within the Hometree group. Hometree Finance is a provider of consumer finance. So we directly fund for homeowners, um, enabling them to get access to heat pumps, also solar panels, batteries, EV charging, very specifically decarbonisation retrofit of people's homes, consumers' homes. Um, as you say, we're part of the wider Hometree group, and the group really does three things. We're the finance business, and we look out at the whole of the market, and we'll partner with all kinds of heat pump and renewables installers to help them help their customers fund equipment. But also we have a home cover business, 100,000 customers who are paying Hometree to maintain their existing heating system, which obviously is an opportunity to patiently figure out the right point for people to make the switch, perhaps. And then the third part of the business is we are acquiring and building out a national installation capacity. So as you say, purchased IMS about 9 months ago. We've made 4 acquisitions so far, and there'll be more to come. So the vision is to be that kind of one-stop shop where you can provide consumers with the latest and greatest kind of home energy equipment. You can maintain and look after it for them. Talks very much to that point about outcomes, optimization, making sure that it actually does what it's supposed to do. And then my part is specifically around helping people to afford it, finance it in innovative ways that make it easier for customers to make the right choices about their energy. You know, ideally you want people to be able to not get another gas boiler. As simple as that.
And I suppose one of your advantages is, like you say, you've got, I think you said over 100,000 customers. So you've already kind of got an in. You're already communicating with people, aren't you? And around their around their heating.
Absolutely, yes. A big challenge specifically with retrofit, where you're looking to decommission a gas boiler and install a heat pump, is that most home heating replacements happen following a breakdown. And if it's December the 10th and you've got a cold house and you've got two kids, and it's really very difficult to make any choice other than to phone up the local gas guy and say, "Can I have another one, please?" But where you have this ongoing relationship with a large number of consumers, and you are maintaining that gas, or in a few cases perhaps even oil kit, there's a fantastic opportunity to have that patient education process and say, okay, look, Mrs. Jones, your boiler's 13 years old. It's fine, but we're getting near to that point. This year when we come and do your service, could we also bring somebody along, do a survey, do some calculations, look at your home, think what might work for you, and maybe next year, before we do the service, we'll actually instead do this new thing.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic opportunity. It is a very patient journey, and people are maybe not used to that as consumers.
Yeah.
But I think it's super important to be able to take people on that journey. And as I said, help them make the better choice rather than just having no real choice, but to get another gas boiler because it's cold.
So we all know that one of the biggest hurdle for these consumers is cost, isn't it? Affording, being able to pay for something to be done like a heat pump installation, and this is where you guys come in. You've got something, you've got these programs running within the Heat Pump Ready. So just explain, Matthew, exactly what your project is all about and what it's hoping to achieve.
Yeah, of course. So the Heat Pump Ready project that we been working in for about the last 18 months, 2 years, has the very imaginatively titled name, The Green Homeowner Loan. So in very simple terms, it was about us putting together a loan and also actually a lease product, which I'll talk about separately, a loan that is specifically targeted for consumers who are looking to retrofit decarbonisation into their homes. And the key parts of that were around going out to the institutional debt markets, going out to big institutional lenders and talking to them about how we might get the cost of finance as low as it possibly can be, given the purpose. And there is a real motivation, I think, now finally, in the institutional kind of capital markets, that money wants to do good and money wants to be flowing towards these kind of projects that are actually genuinely kind of having a net positive benefit on society. So a big part of that was us engaging with so big lenders and putting together a structure which enabled us to get a low cost of capital. Also, partly because of the broader context around Hometree and this whole idea of having this ongoing relationship with customers, it is really important for us that where we're funding something for a consumer, whether that's a heat pump, solar, or a battery, whatever, we are doing so with confidence that it's going to give them a good outcome. It is a very bad outcome for everybody. It's certainly including us as the finance business. If you have poorly performing equipment, unreliable, systems, the worst case obviously would be a low yielding heat pump that actually ends up costing more to run than the boiler it replaced. Awful outcome. And so part of what we've been doing in the Heat Pump Ready project is actually building out our kind of expertise and systems so that as part of our kind of underwriting, as part of our kind of responsible assessment of whether this is appropriate and affordable for a consumer, we're also not just looking at this person's credit and their affordability and all that sort of stuff. We're also looking at what is the equipment. Do we think that this makes good sense in the round for this consumer, and giving a bit of extra comfort where perhaps consumers are a little bit circumspect, a little bit nervous about new technology as they perceive it. I know that heat pumps are not new at all, but there's a perception that it's a very new thing. And so it's about bringing together both the best cost of capital, but also that broader support piece where you can give the customer a bit of confidence that you'll be a partner for them and that you're standing by the kit as well as just providing the funding for it.
Mm.
And the final piece, and it goes to this key point around affordability, and I always talk about what's the cost of getting what's the cost of getting a new gas boiler on a 10-year finance plan? It's sort of about 40 quid a month. How do you get to a place where a person can see that a heat pump could cost about the same? Bus obviously is currently in the mix, and that's a huge help. But there are lots of homes for which the cost of the conversion is significantly more than bus's funding, and so the residual number is still a decent chunk. And it's about how do you help the customer get monthly payments down to a point where they can kind of go, look, the boiler would have been 40 quid. This heat pump is 55. Oh, this makes sense to me.
Yeah. And how difficult is that? Is that
It's not rocket science in the sense that finance is affordable when the monthly payments are small, and the monthly payments are small when the interest burden is low, and when the term is long. And you can't have absurdly long terms, but we are able to offer finance terms right out to the kind of expected working life of the equipment. So we can do 15-year finance for air source heat pumps. We do 20-year finance for ground source. And with solar and batteries, we can go to 25. So we can help people fund the equipment out over its useful life. But a significant part of it has simply been going to kind of some very big industrial funders. And we put in place facilities with Barclays and with the Canadian Pension Fund last summer. We now have £300 million of funds available specifically for this purpose, specifically for domestic retrofit. And there is a sense in which to get it cheap, you just have to go big. And it has been a big bet for us. We have definitely taken the kind of very long-term strategic view that we just need to believe that we're going to get a lot of this finance away. We just have to be bold, and we certainly have done that. And so by setting up this much larger structure with some fantastic backers, we've been able to get the cost of the finance, a long way down from where it would be if it was a sort of a boiler. If you take a boiler loan these days, it's 12% APR, give or take. Where we are, we're sort of in 7s and 8s. So, round about sort of 7.9% APR sort of thing. Still more expensive than perhaps a mortgage for people who can borrow via that route. Still, of course, people that are lucky enough to have money in a savings account, that remains the cheapest overall cost. But for people who are, able to finance, the phrase I use, we talk about able to pay, obviously, and that's the market that's really primed the sector, and it's primed, heat pump and solar. You've got people who are, in a kind of lower income situation where they do need direct support. You've got a huge chunk of people in the middle who don't have £10,000 in a savings account, and even if they did, the thing they would do with it would probably not be a heat pump first, with the best will in the world. But they're able to finance, they're able to fund. They have a home, they have jobs, they're making ends meet, they're in a good place. They just would never be able to dedicate a chunk of capital, and that's the market we're going for. People that are able to fund, and who can then look at the benefits against the costs and say, well, hang on a sec, this is a no-brainer. Of course I'm not going to get another boiler. This is the green choice. It's going to give me greater comfort. There's going to be a cost benefit for me, but also I can finance this and get the right price.
Now, Zach, is your sort of consortium doing something similar? And a question I will come back to you, Matthew, is Zach, is there anyone else involved in your consortium, or is it just Energiesprong, or is there other partners?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of an insight to what we're doing, because it is quite different. I think there's lots of overlaps, but we're working in quite a different sector. So we, Energiesprong, are very focused on the social housing sector.
Right.
So not owner occupiers, not private rental, but social housing who own lots of stock. So they might have thousands of homes each, or tens of thousands of homes. And they have kind of critical needs to improve the efficiency, move towards net zero. Funding streams are slightly different. They can't access like the BUS grants, for instance, for doing heat pumps, but they can do SHDF funding. So they're doing some fabric works. So, there's some different grants and schemes out there for it, and it constantly chops and changes, and we kind of roll with the times on those kind of things. But we are trying to overcome that, what's kind of commonly referred to as like the split incentive. The landlord owns the property, but the resident is the one who's kind of paying for the bills. If the landlord pays for the retrofit measures to be installed, then traditionally retrofit models like pass all of those energy savings back to the residents. Now that's great for the residents, but it's really not conducive to the delivery of like equitable and wide-scale retrofit, including heat pumps, but also fabric measures and, solar systems and the like. There's also traditionally, there's no performance guarantees. So we've talked about that before. So that underperformance risk sits with the landlord and the resident. The resident's going to feel it because it's not running as cheaply and they're buying more energy from the grid, and the landlord's going to feel it because the residents are ringing up saying, this thing's costing me more, why do you do this to my house? So yeah, through the Heat Pump Ready program, we've spent the last 2 years refining and developing our solution to this. We call it the Comfort Plan. And the Comfort Plan is essentially a pay-as-you-save cost recovery mechanism. So a proportion of the energy savings that are made through the retrofit measures are recouped from the resident, and all kind of backed off and underpinned by that performance guarantee. So the aim of that is that the residents are kind of always better off than they would have been without the retrofit. So they still make some saving, but not as much saving as if they'd had, fabric done, solar done, battery installed, heat pump done. They'd be making quite a big chunk there, maybe £1,000 a year, a normally kind of heated home. So it's basically using some of that saving to enhance the business model for retrofit for social housing providers. So that's what the Comfort Plan is. We've always had it as part of our sort of kind of plans for retrofit in the UK. And we were born out of the Netherlands. That's where Energiesprong started. As you might guess, it doesn't sound like a very British word. So yeah, Dutch for energy leap or energy spring. And they have slightly different mechanisms for enabling it, but we knew we wanted to recoup some of that kind of retrofit investment via payments from the residents over the long term. So the way that kind of looks in reality and what this project has kind of developed is how the residents kind of see a monthly charge, which is kind of doing that repayment, how they get transparency of the savings that they've made versus the Comfort Plan charges. It's a fixed charge and it's calculated against kind of projected savings, but then measured in reality. So we know that it's actually being achieved. And then if it was underperforming, then they would get rebates or credits kind of against that. And the way that we've modeled it and that we've run the systems is that the residents should be saving at least kind of 20% on what they are currently paying. So we can get into the details of where this works really well and doesn't kind of down the line. But we always want a house that's had an Energiesprong retrofit to be making a savings. The residents should be better off than they were. And some of that is financial, 20% on their energy savings. But a lot of it is also comfort and health and well-being and things that are kind of tricky to value in the market. And I think there's a lot to be done there in kind of unlocking that social value of retrofit, because the improvement to people's lives and neighborhoods and communities is massive. We spend a lot of time going into social housing and, they're cold, they're moldy, and then the housing providers are having to deal with that. Whereas once you're insulated and you've got a good ventilation system and you've got a heating system that you don't feel nervous to turn on because it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg when you do, like you keep the house a bit warmer. And, you've thought in the retrofit, like where are clothes going to be dried and how's the vent in the kitchen going to come on when they're actually cooking and using it. So, it's about usability of homes as well. And that's something we still need to unlock in the future of how to kind of really value that improvement, that social value that you get from retrofit schemes.
Yeah, that's a very important piece, isn't it? And is anyone else in your consortium with you, or is it just a?
Yeah, so we've been working very closely with an organisation called Carnego. Carnego offer they do a lot of the data monitoring on pilot projects that we've done in the past. So they've installed lots of monitoring equipment, and then that information goes to a cloud, and they kind of run that for the contractors to do that kind of validation of whether the things are working like they should do. They're doing a lot of that work, and they've got the expertise in kind of connecting up to the heat pump. So, talking to a Viessmann or a Valent or a Mitsubishi heat pump and, getting the data from it. And yeah, so they've been doing the kind of the data piece. And then Smart Club are the other kind of main party that actually there's one more. So Smart Club are a main party we've been working with as well. And they are our billing and kind of statement experts. So they do the invoicing side to the residents. They've done a lot of work with the Nottingham Trent basin development and the heat network that's rolled out there. So kind of actually billing the residents for the heat that they're using. So they're our experts in that field. And then the final party was Put ANSI, who are our kind of legal and legal advisors. So getting our legal contracts in place for this comfort plan was a big part of the project. So, the resident has something that they can actually sign, a little bit like a broadband or a mobile phone contract that says, I'm going to be paying this much on a monthly basis, and here's the protections that are afforded to me, and here's what will happen if it's underperforming, and how that whole system works. So, we now have a legally binding kind of contract that can be put in place for this consumer services agreement to run the comfort plan. Which is excellent, a really good outcome of the project. We don't think that's the end. We want to talk to lots of other organisations of better ways of doing this and more streamlined, because, there comes some VAT implications with running a consumer service agreement, and there's costs in managing it and doing that data between all the parties. So actually, as the world progresses towards smarter systems and more integrated onboard monitoring, we can bring the costs of these things down massively. But, in essence, we've got in place the model that a landlord at scale could say, right, I'm doing these retrofit measures and I'm paying for the capital. They might access some of Matthew's funding to do that, or finance from other places. And then the comfort plan is the bit kind of second to that then builds that business model kind of down the line. So, our modelling says that if they've got 1,000 homes that they've been retrofitting, at the moment they're missing out on about £1 million a year of kind of potential revenue that could come back through a comfort plan to help them do more retrofit in the future. So it's about sort of 3 to 5% of retrofit costs on an annual basis that could be coming back in, to help that journey down the line.
Matthew, anyone else involved with Hometree in your project?
Involved, yes. We're not formally part of a consortium. Actually, right. My business was acquired by Hometree during the Heat Pump Ready program. So in some senses, one of the businesses that I was working with is now part of my business itself. And you touched earlier on the fact that, for example, IMS now part of our group. So we're not part of a formal consortium, but certainly through Heat Pump Ready have met kind of people across the industry, and in particular, lots of people who are very interested to take our finance to market. Our model is that we really are providing the installer with a tool to help their customer fund. So our customers, in some sense, are the installers, like the IMSs of the world. So through Heat Pump Ready, we've certainly met a few of those. And as I said, we're now sort of have had this great benefit that during the HPR process, we became part of the Hometree group and now have access to that.
What was your sort of the main learning from this your particular project within the Heat Pump Ready? Because we're coming to the end. I think it's all ending in March. There's obviously some Wave 2 projects that will probably still be running. What is the main finding, main learning that you guys have got from it?
I think from our point of view, two things. One of which was exactly what we expected, and one of which was a little bit more of an interesting kind of something less obvious. We expected to confirm that long duration, low cost finance unlocks demand, unlocks ability to make those choices, and that is absolutely being borne out, and that's fantastic. And so there's a sense in which we have quite simply done what we thought we would be able to do, which is fantastic, and we're very grateful to the HPR support for that. The other piece that's come out is, and I mentioned this earlier, we've also been looking at loan and lease finance products. The way I always talk about this stuff is I go to the car industry, because people are familiar with car finance. It's a really big developed market. People want to get cars. Some people can just go into the Volkswagen dealership and say, I'd love a new Golf, and here's my bank transfer. And that's great. Some people can go to their bank in advance, get themselves a loan, and then come in and be a cash buyer with the dealer. Some people want to spread the cost out over 7 years and have a loan. Some people want a PCP where there's a bullet payment at the end. Some people want a lease where they can say, you know what, I would love it if the servicing, the maintenance, the tires, the breakdown, maybe even the insurance are all bundled in. We've got a fixed monthly cost. It's someone else's problem if it breaks down, it's not reliable, all that sort of stuff. And the exact same thing, but perhaps not surprisingly, turns out to be true in retrofit. Some people would just like the idea of, I've got a cost here of £6,000 or £7,000, let's say, on top of the US. I'd love to spread that out over 15 years, a loan at 7% interest. Brilliant, thank you very much. Some people, particularly with heat pumps, I think, are circumspect and nervous about, yeah, my gas boiler works. It turned out massive amounts of hot water. It was great, kind of thing. These systems that are set at 75 degree flow temperature, not condensing at all. Customers think that's really good. They like the fact their radiators are scalding. Sadly, people are nervous about what they perceive as a new thing. They're worried that the heat pump is going to break down. They're aware that they're getting this big grant from the government, which is great, but I'm thinking, well, if this system is really costing £12,000, when it breaks down in 4 years' time, am I going to have £1,000 bill for a widget inside my heat pump? So models where we are providing the funding for the equipment, but actually also taking direct responsibility for its reliability, its maintenance, bundling in the annual service, bundling in cover for breakdown, and obviously in the broader Hometree business, we have this cover product which exactly fits here. That's been a real learning where the extent to which the more kind of risk averse consumer who would love to make the green choice, but has read stuff in the Daily Mail about how heat pumps don't work, giving them the opportunity where you can say, well, actually, how about you take this other product where we'll fund it, but we'll directly, it will be our responsibility. Almost like Mrs. Jones, if it doesn't work, you're just not going to pay us. You know what I mean? The monthly fee that you're going to pay us, whether that's 50, 60, £70, let's say, that's not you paying off a debt. That's you getting a month's worth of comfort from us. And if you don't get the comfort, well, obviously you're going to not pay us. And that's something that came out in research, and we've actually now kind of built out a parallel product alongside this loan product, where consumers can get a monitored, supervised, maintained green product in their homes. And I think that's really going to unlock demand, particularly with people who are sort of willing but nervous.
Very important point, isn't it? That this whole the consumer piece and the psychology behind it all, of like you say, because it's for a lot of people, this is a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Financially, and also because like you've touched on, people aren't very aware. If you ask most people what's the name of their boiler, they probably wouldn't know, but they are very aware that it keeps them warm to the point where they just don't even think about it anymore. They just turn something on, whether it's the programmer turning it on for them. And now we're asking consumers to actually really sort of sit down and think about their heating system, because we're getting them to try and think about actually changing it. And like you say, there's some, quite rightly so, that a lot of people are very nervous. So that leasing system is designed to attenuate and mitigate that nervousness. And then, so how do you convey that messaging to the consumer? How are you sort of going, getting across that you've got this lease product and what it will do, and how do you sort of convey that messaging?
Yeah. So as I said, so we're what you call a point of sale finance provider. So as I said, in some sense, our customer is actually the installer business, who is out there finding their consumer customers, drumming up demand, trading off hopefully fantastic word of mouth, really good reputation. So what we do is give the installer the tools to kind of introduce our product alongside talking to the customer about their home, its energy, heat losses, etc., etc. I'm not going to go too far into the kind of arcane regulatory details. There are essentially two models that you can follow. This is obviously a regulated finance product supervised by the FCA. Larger installers will often be what's called a credit broker, so they'll have their own kind of license from the FCA where they are allowed to kind of introduce and talk to the customer about finance. And in that situation, we're obviously providing them with all the materials about our product, things like co-branded brochures. We'll support them putting stuff on their websites, etc., running marketing, etc. But they are able to actually go into the home and describe, with our support, how our finance works. The actual application process is, as you'd expect in 2025, is completely digital. It's a sort of 2-3 minute name, address, date of birth, income kind of thing, and we do very quick underwriting and approval, hopefully. With smaller installers, there's a sort of lighter weight regulatory model, which is called being an introducer appointed representative. Essentially, it's a model where we supervise the installer directly. they agree to limit their activity around the finance to essentially just handing over our materials. And then what the customer does is they get access to, they'll have a printed or a digital brochure of ours. They get a link which is bespoke for them to come to our website. That's the place where they can read all the information about the product, look at, for example, loan versus lease, weigh up the benefits, watch a video, and if they're interested, go through the process and find out if they'd be eligible.
And is this is something that any small installer can do already? Is this all set up so like let's say for instance the smaller installers I know, would they be able to come to you guys straight away now and get this sort of product for them?
So yes-ish. So just from a timing point of view, as you say, we're right at the end of Heat Pump Ready. It runs to March. We're just on the brink of actually going out to sort of the wider market in terms of this opportunity on heat pump. But yes, certainly over the next sort of few months into the summer, we will be out actively looking to recruit and onboard installers of all sizes, as you say, to be able to offer this heat pump finance alongside their fantastic high quality installation and design services.
Yeah, that's interesting. Come back to you, Zach. So obviously you're in a sort of a very different market, really, aren't you? This whole social housing market. Are you seeing sort of good moves? I mean, let's say if we went back 5 years, obviously social housing sort of are becoming aware of some of the measures they've got to do. Are you seeing sort of good movement in this sector?
Yeah, so I mean we've had lots of learnings from this project, and that seems to be what Energiesprong do, constantly learn and try and feed things back into the system. But yeah, we're seeing massive demand from social housing providers to kind of crack the nut, figure out how they're going to achieve this net zero mission in a way that works really well for their finances, really well for the residents, kind of reduces their reactive and planned maintenance loads in the future, gets that real good customer satisfaction. So yeah, landlords kind of want this like simplicity and minimum resident impact as well. They know retrofit is quite disruptive. So they do want these things to be done, but know they're going to work and, have residents on board. And, Matthew mentioned there a little bit about the kind of the perceptions of heat pumps and, we're overcoming that some way. Someone said a phrase to me a while ago. They said there's two types of people having heat pumps installed, like those that are having it forced upon them. That's our sector, and those that are offsetting their Porsche. And I think Matthew, you've coined some in the middle there now. There is a middle ground of like, actually, I'm kind of ready to do the right thing. I've got a bit of savings. I'm going for the environmental approach, but we're in the market of people having heat pumps and other retrofit measures essentially forced upon them because they're renting their homes, and whilst from an engineering perspective it feels like the right thing to do, actually what they like is getting on with their day-to-day life and not having builders traipse in and out and not having someone knock on their door and then not be in and have to come back another day. They kind of want a smooth journey. So actually from the residents, we've spent a lot of time doing stakeholder engagement, and particularly with the residents, but also with others. But from a resident perspective, actually thermal performance isn't the main factor here in a retrofit. Like they want comfort in their house, yes, but they kind of want their expectations to be met. And those expectations can be quite broad, not just, I want my house to be 20 degrees. We need success is going to be driven by good customer experience in all of this. And that we are trying to work quite heavily. We've got some other projects that are really looking at how to, how to bring the residents' perspective into this retrofit delivery process much, much better. And maybe there are some options. Maybe there are some. With fabric, certainly we on quite a lot of schemes we've gone. What color? Here's a palette of colors. Like, what do you want your home to be? And that kind of engagement is something to kind of have their input into it, rather than it being forced upon. And this comfort plan for us is, like we said before, it's about delivering the outcomes, not specific technology. So our outcomes do need to be warm and comfortable homes, but they also need to be desirable and not complicated. And we talk about people interacting with heating systems. Gas boiler heating systems are complicated. I did some research 10 or 15 years ago now that, are showing quite clearly that most people don't know how to interact with their programmable thermostat. They're all quite alien. They leave it and it gets on with the thing. And luckily, gas is reasonably cheap that you don't notice it massively. Electricity is a bit more expensive. And if the COP is not good, you're maybe a bit more sensitive to it. So, we need to overcome some of those issues as well. But yeah, so we're not technology focused. It's like outcome based. So we need to focus on that. Yeah, we found definitely that the contractors, also want to be able to deliver more retrofit. Like they know it needs doing, and they have teams of people who can install heat pumps and insulation and solar panels, and they're ready to do it, but they need kind of consistency and like a long-term pipeline to be able to do that, to get that scale and really kind of like capture that bit of the market. And I think you're seeing it with utility companies now. Most of the big utility companies have schemes that you can get a heat pump installed through them or solar panels installed through them. So you can kind of get the tech. You can't get the fabric stuff at the moment. And that's a piece that we're constantly working on, and we think the comfort plan really helps with kind of unlocking that. Well, if you're already getting a heat pump and solar, actually, if you do your fabric, it can really reduce the risk of underperformance on those things. Or perhaps fabric only is the right approach for your home. There needs to be there's differences between each individual homes. Yeah, so I think we also spent a lot of time working with utility providers, and they're actually quite well placed to be able to charge residents a comfort plan, because they're already billing residents. But it's not necessarily their kind of their standard business model at the moment. So we're going to carry on working with them closely to think about the pay as you save mechanisms. So we need that development work, and they are all innovating at the moment. I'm seeing tariffs pop up left, right, and centre, and those will continue to change. And I think that will unlock some benefits of doing these kind of low energy retrofits. But yeah, for us, it's that fabric piece. Like how do we better fund the fabric when it's appropriate to do? And that isn't always the case. But with the data, you can kind of say, look, these types of houses, we do a lot of work with non-traditional houses, for instance, so, old steel framed or, wimpy no-fine type constructions. And a lot of them really do need some fabric upgrades before you can start thinking about anything else. On the flip side, there's lots of cavity filled or thick solid walls that have been, plastered to high hilt on the inside and rendered externally, and are actually quite thick, and the U values aren't terrible, and you can run a heat pump really well. I personally installed a ground source heat pump on our old solid wall semi-detached property, and it's glorious. Very constant temperature. I insulated under the floor and did the loft, but actually left the fabric as it was. And it's been a kind of godsend in many ways. So yeah, it can work on properties. You gotta know the building physics to get that bit right.
With social housing, obviously, lots of social housing is out there, and they're being heated in different ways. So some have got, like you say, gas boilers, and then there's lots of others that have got electric storage heaters. Are you finding with the consumers that, let's say, the people living with electric storage heaters, for instance, are more inclined to want this technology because it's electric heating, and they realise it's going to be cheaper, or hopefully it's going to be cheaper, as opposed to someone that's used to their gas boiler and the other properties they may have lived in with gas boilers? 'Cause lots of people are very used to their gas boilers on it. Are you finding any distinctions between the different cohorts of what they've got already?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've come across any social housing tenant in my past that said, I really want a heat pump, or anything to do with heating systems, to be
Yeah.
honest. I hear the grumbles of this thing doesn't work like it wants to. And that's the same with gas boilers or storage heaters or direct electric panels. So yeah, if you're thinking about the outcomes of it, yes, people want a system that's easy to control, cost effective, and keeps them warm and comfortable within their home and isn't disruptive. And there's lots of ways of doing that. So in our parallel heat pump ready project, which was looking at archetypes of retrofit, one of the schemes there has had 7 homes that have had heat pumps, air source heat pumps installed. and 3 homes which were originally storage heaters, and they've had infrared panels installed. And they've just been completed, so we're now looking at the data to understand like how well are those infrared panels working, and are they cost effective, and are they offering that kind of comfort and satisfaction to the residents? Because in the end, if they are and they're cost effective to run, that's a good approach for us, and we can say, well, do you need to put in a wet system into a storage heater home, which is complicated, drilling pipes and running pipes around houses? Or are there other ways of doing it? Or can you max out the fabric and, keep just direct electric in there? So I think there's many ways to skin the cat, as it were. And that's, for me, what needs to happen quite quickly in the retrofit industry is, gathering that data and feedback, including, occupant satisfaction and, kind of comfort. So I spend a lot of time doing that, kind of interviewing and surveying residents to find out from their perspective what is and isn't working. And I think once you do that at scale, quite quickly, you learn, like, yes, heat pumps are working in these homes for these reasons. And yes, infrared panels worked here. And yes, keeping storage heaters worked really well. And now there's solutions for doing that. So yeah, it's closing that kind of feedback loop of what's working. We're sort of flying a bit blind at the moment.
Matthew, come back to you. You were obviously in finance before you got involved with Hometree. I'm just interested. What were you sort of doing? I mean, you've obviously very clever ants finance piece. I wish I was. I'd have a lot more money.
So I mean, a very long time ago, I was a software developer. The way I usually talk about myself and the co-founder of the business that became part of Hometree is he is the finance and I'm the geek. So I'm an unapologetic nerd kind of thing, and my background had always been in software development, and we came together about 6 years ago, both having come out of various roles. He'd been working in various parts of the renewables industry. He'd worked for a heat pump installer. He'd worked for big businesses thinking about strategy around energy. I was actually thinking about what I guess is now referred to as an agile tariff, because Octopus cracked on and did it. I was thinking in about 2018 about, could you expose consumers to 30-minute wholesale price metering and enable them to optimize their home energy through solar, battery, EV, heat pump, etc. So super motivated around, again, this point about how do you help homeowners make better choices on their energy. And he'd been researching various models that exist in the Netherlands, as it happens, in Germany, and also in the US around this leasing proposition in particular, but also in the US and in Canada, kind of big models for finance for green domestic retrofit. And we kind of thought, well, he's got this finance background, I've got the software background, can build the digital tools to enable the installers and the consumers to get the product really easily and with best information. And we built it. And I was going to say, I'm ashamed to say we spent the first 3 years installing some gas boilers. I'm not sure I am ashamed to say it. We quite deliberately went to the big scaled market where you knew you could get out there and learn. So, we cut our teeth installing some gas. That is now completely tailing out. We, as a business, Hometree would no longer even be able, if it even wanted to, would no longer be able to install any gas appliances in 2027. But yeah, so we started out with learning in the gas industry, how to provide this better form of finance. And then through the support of Heat Pump Ready, and ultimately through this acquisition by Hometree, we've been able to really turbocharge the business. And now, where sort of 3 or 4 years ago we'd have been talking sort of fancifully about doing hundreds of £1 million or billions of pounds of origination, it's now the plan. And we're hopefully just at the beginning of that big ramp phase where we can go and kind of really make a difference into the tens of thousands of homes, and really drive and ideally, drive the cost of the finance down further. There's a very big challenge to getting 600,000 heat pumps installed a year, getting to climate targets is a big job. And if we can be a part of that and move the needle, then great.
Is there anything else that needs to be done within this whole finance world? I mean, we've touched on the sort of the APR around about 7%, is it? I mean, that'd be nice if that came down for everyone, I suppose, wouldn't it? But
interest rates coming down obviously would be fantastic. The that's something that we hope will happen for everyone's benefit in a wider sense. I think the government are trying to do the right thing genuinely. I know the bus grant obviously is a huge tool for affordability around heat pumps for homeowners. There have been some complications with bus that it didn't interact perfectly with finance. That is feedback that through HPR I've been able to give to Des and to Ofgem, and I know that they're looking at kind of making some adaptations to bus perhaps in its next version that will make this even easier and more straightforward. Ultimately, I guess with heat pumps specifically, the challenge is the relative cost of electricity and gas. The spark gap, as it were, the spark spread, is challenging where you have a homeowner who is willing but fundamentally not really green motivated. The most important thing for them is the monthly bill. You can make it work. You can get COPs up in the fours, as Zach says. You can, and there are tariffs that help. But really, what we need to see is utility pricing, energy pricing moving in a way that supports the transition from gas to electric. And I think at that point, really, all the pieces are there for us to hopefully go out and really accelerate the rate at which these things are getting installed.
Hmm. Yeah, and so the leasing model is a very interesting model because, like you say, lots of people seem to be very used to. I mean, even down to things like washing machines. People lease their washing
Yeah,
machine.
yeah. It's a model that, as you say, maybe at first mention, it seems like a slightly odd thing
Mm.
for a piece of kit in your home, and obviously a piece of kit that you regard as essential. That your heating system is in the heart of your home in some senses. But yes, it's completely commonplace with cars. And there are people out there who finance their laptops, their televisions, all kinds of things that kind of way. It's not for everybody, and the solution is to have a breadth of options that mean everyone can choose the thing that works for them. But I do think that there's a really significant benefit around, as I said, that sort of slightly more risk averse customer who is willing but nervous, but to have a proposition to them, which is actually, it will be our responsibility to make your home warm, Mrs. Jones. To make sure that your heat pump does what your installer forecasted it would, and delivers you the comfort that you obviously expect and would like to have.
And I suppose one of the pieces around this is the installers that you will eventually want to work with in the future. You'll kind of want to know that they're pretty competent in what they can do. And as we know, and obviously I talk about it a lot on my podcast, is that's actually a hard piece in its own right because how do people know who's whether it's a local authority using large installation companies on their frameworks, or whether it's a homeowner, how do they know who is good? Very, very hard not to solve at the moment because obviously the only sort of reference point people have is, well, are they qualified and are they part of the register, let's say MCS, because obviously you have to be if you're doing bus. And as everyone is learning, that actually isn't a good metric for understanding if people are competent. So I mean, so when you sort of start to sort of expand this sort of project of yours and are looking for installation engineers, have you got any thinking in place around how you're going to sort of solve that problem of how do you know you're getting someone that's quite competent?
Yeah. It's a huge part of the way we think. I mean, it is literally the case that, particularly in the lease model, the way the structure actually works is we are the buyer of the equipment. So the installer is out there and they've worked with the homeowner to understand their heat loss and what is appropriate and making sure that it's going to meet their requirements. But fundamentally, the invoice from the installer comes to me and I pay it, and we become the owner of the equipment. So we have a really strong incentive to make sure that we're working with good installers that have that do high quality work, that will stand by the quality of their installations. And a part of our onboarding process with our partners, which is not super burdensome, but it is relatively in depth. We do look at the installer and how they've worked and their reputation in the industry. We are thinking about, as I think a lot of people are, about training, about the extent to which there is, if this transition is going to happen, a very large number of heating engineers are going to have to be retrained, and it isn't simply the case that you rip out a boiler and plumb in a heat pump. Quite the reverse. It's a very different approach. It's a very different set of kind of designs and factors. So we will be. It's directly in our commercial interest, as well as being what we think is best for consumers, that we are almost providing a sort of secondary validation of the quality of the installer. We're not going to be in a sort of model of creating a Trustmark type badge of our own, but it will be the case almost automatically that an installer that we're working with will be somebody that we have met, got to know well, looked at their work, looked at their track record, and are standing by and saying, yeah, these guys do good work. There will inevitably be a few cases where that goes wrong, and again, the benefit for the customer there is, if that does happen, and it's bound to, and hopefully rarely, we'll still be around, and we'll be able to provide that kind of support back up if we do need to have somebody in to remediate something that hasn't quite gone correctly. That will be part and parcel of our offer to the consumer, because, as again, what the consumer's really paying for is a system that works. And if for any reason the original installer is not able to remediate, or perhaps they've actually gone out of business, which does occasionally happen, it will still be on us to step in and bring in, possibly bring in Emma from IMS to sort it out. But bring in somebody that we know would be able to get it right.
And that's sort of very comforting for a homeowner to understand, because obviously homeowners that get an install from an installer, some are fearful that this installer might go bust in next year or whenever, and of course then they've got the problem of, well, who's going to fix my heat pump now, or if it goes wrong, and you sort of alleviate that. It's a little bit like heat as a service model, isn't it? The leasing thing, because you
it has similar elements, yes. I mean, we're not currently bundling in kind of the utility. We're talking to quite a few utility suppliers, some of whom are specifically saying, could we combine your kind of fully maintained lease with our tariff and achieve a true heat as a service product for a heat pump? So we've got a couple of the big installers we're having, big utilities we're having those conversations with. But yes, it is as much as the customer really mostly perceives it as just spreading out the cost and making it affordable, it is actually that distinctly different product of, you're not gradually paying off a loan. You're paying month by month for comfort, for reliability, for the certainty that even if something unexpected does happen, you're not going to be faced with a 4-figure bill for a repair.
Zach, are you sort of finding anything with your customers that's really, really intrigued you while you've been doing this program, that sort of surprised you? I was going to say.
Well, I think we've got a lot of parallel issues there. So, we talk about the workforce and the sort of confidence in being able to do a good install and having good kit. And I think, our method for overcoming that is thinking about performance guaranteeing it. So, you're on the hook for what that does. And early days, that can seem a little bit unnerving for a main contractor, because they've not worked like that before. They've done 12 months defect and got on with another project, and that's fine. It works well there. But this retrofit kind of problem and challenge is a little bit different. And we found really positive engagement with that and learning from it as well. If you're the installer of the kit, so the person that's coming to you, Matthew, and saying, right, here's my invoice for this bit of kit. If you can come back to them in 12 months' time and say, that was a really good bit of kit, I want more of that, that is gold for them, because they know that doing it like that is good and they can replicate it, and they'll get really good testimonials, really good business. They want to be doing that. It's just that there's a lot of heads in the sand at the moment about what does and doesn't work, but fundamentally most of it can work, and it might just be little kind of quirks of the install, or something that's kind of gone wrong, or a piping arrangement, or sizing of radiators, or controls. There's loads of little bits that can make it better, but actually, like, heat pumps are good bits of kit. Matthew said they're not new, they're not modern. They're new as a heating system in the UK, but they're not new as a concept or a technology. So it's about just getting them installed correctly. So yeah, we think that feedback loop is really, really important. And that's feedback from installers, but also from residents about what does and doesn't work. So are they actually achieving what they want from the retrofit, or what we expected? So, we're very clear on the need for all of these projects and designs to have clear targets set. So, in all of our projects, we will say, right, if the house is 20 degrees inside, how much energy will that heat pump be using, and how much would I be drawing from the grid, and how much would it cost the resident? And that's what they will get measured against in the performance guarantee. Now, actually, a lot of our projects have used fairly conservative COPs to make that model stack up. So maybe even a COP of 2, because if you can make that like performance model work at a COP of 2, you've got some factor of safety there. So, if it's a COP of 3, the resident's going to be better off. And, there's more flexibility in it. It's better for everyone. So, we found most of ours, I've not seen any that have gone into the performance guarantee that go above 3, because they're nervous to say that. But you get HeatGeek installs that are guaranteeing above 4, I think 4.1 something, and you've got the top of the Scots. It's a great name for a website. But yeah, looking at the COPs of the heat pumps, and there are loads on there that are really good, and you go to there and you go, oh, I can see that installer I'm in Bristol area. I can see the installers in Bristol area who are doing a really good job and promoting it and selling it and shouting about it, and that's where you build this market really quickly. You get that confidence. And I do think like social housing can do that at scale because they have the scale. Individual householders, you need to kind of get that information spread is a bit harder, but the landlord as the owner of it, wants to kind of know, and they can oversee what's happening on all these different schemes. So I think there's real potential to do it. I'm not worried about the potential of retrofit making an impact. It's just how do we join up all of these really useful bits of thinking within Heat Pump Ready and beyond to get kind of collaboration and cohesion in the industry. I think it's really kind of high time to do that and kind of crack on with it. We've been talking about it for years, and 600,000 heat pumps a year, that kind of thing is like we could be doing it. There's definitely that many boilers going in. So yeah, it can be done. We just need to kind of get on with it.
Yeah, lots of interesting work going on in your area, Bristol. I was in a meeting yesterday with Bristol City Council. Lots of interesting stuff going on. Well, it was been great to chat with you both about finance. I hope my listeners are a little bit more informed about these sort of exciting measures that are going to be coming to the fore around sort of finance, because it obviously has been a massive hurdle for, we're still on that sort of adoption curve. We're probably still at innovators. We probably haven't even reached the early adopters yet. And because this whole thing of cost is a big barrier, and obviously these models seem to be able to attenuate that and alleviate that. So thank you both for coming on. Look forward to chatting to you again sometime. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan.